Tonight, the silence whispers, and I, a watchful soul, follow its echoes through time. Feel the crisp hush of autumn leaves falling gently onto ancient stone. Breathe in the scent of damp earth, rich with forgotten stories. Around you, the wrought iron gates of Père-Lachaise creak softly as if remembering. The moon hangs low, veiled in mist, casting pale light upon the resting places of dreamers and rebels alike. Here, in a quiet corner, kissed by ivy and candlelight, lies one who spoke in paradoxes, who lived in defiance and brilliance, Oscar Wilde. If these stories stir something gentle in your heart, return to us again and whisper where you are listening from. Now lie back, let your body grow heavy and your breath soften. Inhale the night air of Paris. Let it carry you through time. Let us remember together a world woven from poetry, scandal, exile, and beauty. A life that still murmurs between the moss and the moss. Close your eyes, traveler. We begin. The trees above rustle like pages turning slowly, their golden leaves descending one by one onto the gravel paths. I walk softly, as I always do, careful not to disturb the resting. Père-Lachaise knows me, each stone, each shadow, each echo beneath the soil. I am its silent keeper, its listener, its remembering voice. And tonight I linger near a tomb, kissed by countless lips and surrounded by quiet awe. The poet rests here, Oscar Wilde. His grave is unlike the others. Wings spread wide in flight, carved from stone, and a wall of glass meant to hold back the lips of visitors, though some still find a way to press their admiration against it. Lipstick stains, poems scribbled in corners, tokens left gently near the base. It is never quite still. Wilde would have smiled at the irony, I think. Exiled, disgraced in life, celebrated in death. He arrived here in 1900, but his story begins long before that final breath in a Paris hotel. I can almost hear his voice carried on the wind, brilliant, biting, wounded. A man born into a world that both adored and feared his genius. His grave is not silent, not truly. It speaks in murmurs, like a candle that refuses to go out. The air tonight is cold and fragrant, like ink on parchment freshly dried. Wilde would have noticed. He always noticed. Even as a child in Dublin, he saw what others ignored: the color of conversation, the rhythm of absurdity. His mother, Lady Jane Wilde, recited poetry with a fire in her voice. His father, a noted surgeon and folklorist, told tales of Irish spirits and ancient stones. From them he inherited two things: language and the ability to see beyond it. He was drawn to Oxford, a place of intellect, yes, but also of beauty. There, Wilde, dressed in velvet, quoted the ancients, and filled his rooms with lilies and sunflowers. Some laughed, many admired, but no one ignored him. He spoke in aphorisms that outlived his breath. He moved through rooms like a spotlight made of silk and shadow. Was it arrogance or armor? The wind picks up slightly, rustling the dry leaves at my feet. One lands gently against the base of the tomb, like a page torn from a book that no longer minds being read. I kneel and listen, not with ears, but with memory. I remember the success, the picture of Dorian Gray, the plays that lit up London stages, the drawing rooms filled with laughter that came from wit rather than joy. Wilde knew how to make people laugh, yes, but it was never just laughter. It was revelation, a mirror turned towards society, polished with charm. And then the trial. The laughter turned bitter. The same society that cheered him found pleasure in his fall. Accused of gross indecency, imprisoned, humiliated. The damp walls of Reading Gaol became his world for 2 years, and yet even there his spirit refused to be quiet. He wrote De Profundis, a long letter, part confession, part elegy, part resurrection. It was not the Wilde of velvet and lilies, but the Wilde of raw wounds and flickering hope. I touch the stone of his tomb now, cool, smooth, enduring. The glass that surrounds it reflects a faint ghost of my own silhouette. I imagine his words lingering just behind the surface. We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. He looked upward, even when buried in shame. That is what made him dangerous. That what made him unforgettable. Paris welcomed him in his final days, not as a triumphant return, but as a refuge for the bruised. He lived in a cheap hotel on the left bank. He joked that the wallpaper was killing him. "One of us has to go," he said. Even in death, wit remained his armor, and perhaps his peace. The moon above shifts slightly, casting a longer shadow behind the tomb. Somewhere in the distance, a night-bird calls once, then falls silent. I stay still, remembering the man who wrote as if truth could be made beautiful enough to survive anything. There is an odd comfort in this place. Père-Lachaise is not merely a graveyard. It is a city of voices, a garden of echoes. Wilde's voice is among the loudest, though he rarely raises it. It hums beneath the gravel. It leans against the trees. It flutters between the names carved in stone. And when the rain falls, and it will, each drop will carry one of his words into the soil again. He was a contradiction, you see, a man of elegance who died poor, a hero of beauty who was condemned by the beautiful, a lover of truth who built entire lives out of artifice. The world demanded he be either saint or sinner. He insisted on being human. Perhaps that is why he still draws us near, not just for the poetry or the wit, but for the pain beneath it, for the courage of someone who dared to live brightly in a world that preferred its geniuses dimmed. A breeze stirs the ivy behind me. I think of his final resting place, surrounded by strangers and pilgrims alike. How curious that he lies now beside politicians, generals, forgotten names. and yet his presence is the one that sings. I rise slowly. My shadow stretches across the stone one last time before fading, and still the words remain. I have nothing to declare except my genius. Even now, I think, the tomb believes him. The eastern gates of Père-Lachaise groan softly as the wind passes through their iron curves. They do not open tonight. No living footsteps disturb the stillness. But I remember how often they have. The gates have heard secrets whispered in mourning, and seen feet shuffle nervously beneath the burden of grief. And yet they've also welcomed those who came not to weep, but to wonder. Oscar Wilde came here not in ceremony, but in solitude. When his body was first buried, it lay in a modest plot, nearly anonymous in the crowd of stones. There was no grand monument then, no winged sculpture, no shrine of lipstick marks. Only the city of Paris and the earth. I walk the pathway just inside those gates where the morning sun used to filter through lacework trees, casting golden patterns on the cobblestones. I remember the day they brought him, quiet, gray, unremarkable to most. But the earth knew. The wind carried something heavier. I felt it in the roots and the rain. Oscar's name, once spoken with laughter or venom, now arrived in silence. He had lived many lives in one. There was the brilliant student, the satirical playwright, the loving father, the defiant lover, the wounded prisoner, the exiled poet. Each version of him left a trace behind, a phrase, a line, a memory suspended in ink. And when he died, those fragments gathered here, drawn like moths to this quiet hill in Paris. I can still sense the weight of his footsteps, though they were carried by others. They lowered him into the ground not with fanfare, but with fatigue. Paris did not yet know it was gaining a star. The soil only knew it was accepting a man. It was not until years later that the tomb appeared, the great winged monument carved in stone by Jacob Epstein, a silent sphinx with stylized features, fierce and graceful, evoking flight even in death. Wilde's literary executor, Robert Ross, had the monument commissioned and paid for its creation himself. He believed Oscar deserved beauty in rest, if not in life. The sculpture caused a stir. As Wilde had in life, so did his grave in death. The monument's exposed genitalia were considered scandalous, offensive, even in stone. For years it was the subject of debate, defacement, even eventual censorship. A fig leaf was added. Later, glass barriers were built to prevent further damage. And yet, people kept coming. Lips touched the stone. Letters were left folded beneath its base. Flowers faded slowly beneath rain and time. His grave became not just a marker, but a destination, a place where memory breathed, where adoration, rebellion, and grief found a shared language. A pilgrimage site for those who saw in him more than the scandal or the sentence. I watch the date's shadow shift now, stretching long and thin across the cracked path. The air carries that same mix of dust and longing that it always has when Wilde's name is spoken nearby. A longing not just for him, but for the permission to live as he did, defiantly, fully, with language as both sword and balm. Oscar was always more than his scandal, but it is impossible to forget how it shaped his final years. His trial in 1895, its courtroom packed, its verdict already whispered in corridors long before the gavel fell, stripped him of everything but his essence. The newspapers called it justice. The public called it spectacle. But for Wilde, it was erasure. Not of his words, no, those had taken root too deeply, but of his freedom, his livelihood, his place in society. And yet, he emerged from prison with words still in him. Not the glittering epigrams or quicksilver charm, but something deeper. His ballad of Reading Jail was raw and rhythmically haunting, pulsing with the grief of every man whose name the world no longer cared to remember. And all men kill the thing they love. By all, let this be heard. He had killed nothing, but had loved too honestly. For that, the world turned its back. And still, he wrote. Visitors now walk through these gates with earbuds, or cameras, or quiet tears. Some of them know only the quotes. Some have never read the plays. Some carry his books folded and dog-eared in the pockets of coats passed down through generations. They come to feel what remains, and something always does. It's not the stone that holds his spirit, it's the space around it, the hush, the ivy crawling up nearby walls, the wind that sometimes seems to laugh with him. Do you know, traveler, what it means to become myth? Not the kind sculpted in marble alone, but the kind whispered between people who never met you, yet claim they know your pain? Wilde's myth was built not by perfection, but by contradiction. He was not saint nor sinner. He was real, and he made being real something extraordinary. The gates behind me groan again in their hinges, as though waking from a memory. I turn once more toward the grave, where that great stone sphinx rises from the earth, wings eternally stretched. His words are still written here, not carved, but remembered. They are in the hush between footfalls, in the quiet nods of those who recognize something of themselves in his sorrow and defiance. To love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance, he once wrote, with a smirk and a sting. And yet, the world tried to teach him shame. Perhaps this place, this garden of names and ghosts, is his final rebellion. A peace not earned by apology, but by endurance. I step back from the grave now, giving space to the silence. The wind pauses as if bowing. The stone does not speak, but it remembers. And I, its keeper, will remember with it. The moonlight settles like dust across the stones, brushing every corner of Père-Lachaise with silver. I walk slowly now, my steps barely felt upon the gravel. Here, beneath the arch of naked branches and sleeping birds, I find myself before a grave that breathes in silence and exhales memory. Oscar's tomb stands tall in its quiet defiance, flanked by the hush of night and the hush of reverence. And it is not only stone that marks his resting place, it is the imprint of thousands of lips. A ritual once forbidden, but never quite extinguished. Lipstick traces bloom across the glass like ghostly flowers. Crimson, rose, and violet prints, faded and fresh, layered upon one another like verses in a secret poem. They kiss the stone not to disturb, but to remember, not to provoke, but to thank. Some believe it began in the 1990s, others say earlier. But what matters is not when it started, only that it continues. Each pair of lips says, "I see you. You mattered." The cemetery once tried to stop the kisses. Conservationists spoke of damage, of erosion, of loss. They erected glass to shield the tomb, and still the kisses returned. Lovers slipped lipstick from pockets, kissed their hands, pressed them to the glass. Some leaned close and whispered Wilde's words, as though he might whisper back. Even in death, he is adored in the way the world once denied him. In life, society demanded his silence. In death, he became a chorus. The leaves gather at my feet, rustling gently, like the pages of a forgotten diary. I crouch beside a single rose left on the ground, its petals browned at the edges, its stem still damp with dew. Someone came this morning, perhaps, or yesterday, or a year ago. Time moves strangely here. I often wonder what Oscar would think looking upon this devotion. Would he laugh? Would he blush? Would he pen a verse about the foolishness of legacy? Or would he simply smile, that sharp, knowing smile that dared the world to look away and found triumph in being seen? I remember the man as he was, not just as the world remembers him. I remember the play of light on his coat, the way he paused before speaking, how he sometimes looked up as if asking permission from the sky. He was no saint. He could be vain, wounded, selfish, but he gave so much of himself to words, to beauty, to truth. Perhaps too much. The path beside his grave curves gently downhill, flanked by tombs of quiet architects, forgotten duchesses, and children who never reached adulthood, all of them silent now. Yet Oscar's grave remains alive, not with noise, but with presence, the presence of those who still believe words matter, that wit can be truth, that love in any form is holy. I run my fingers over the iron railing that wraps around the space, cool to the touch, flecked with rust. It too has witnessed more than it can express. Beyond the glass, beyond the stone, is the carving, the inscription carved simply in capital letters: Oscar Wilde, 1854-1900. And below, the final line from the Ballad of Reading Gaol: and alien tears will fill for him pity's long broken urn, for his mourners will be outcast men, and outcasts always mourn. A line not chosen by accident. Oscar knew who would grieve him. Not the polite society that laughed at his plays and later condemned him, but those who knew too well what it meant to love in silence, to live in fear, to speak truths that might destroy you. He was buried here, yes, but more than that, he was embraced here. Paris did not judge him the way London did, and Père-Lachaise, with its quiet trees and crumbling beauty, offered him not just space, but understanding. The glass reflects a sliver of my form, an outline only. I do not have the lips to leave a kiss, nor the breath to fog the surface. But I remember. That is my offering. Nearby, I hear the faintest crunch of footsteps. Visitors from earlier, lingering in the dark, perhaps whispering wild words to one another, or their own. Many come seeking him, but leave having found themselves. There is something unshakably human in Oscar's defiance. He refused to apologize for his love. He refused to dilute his art. He refused to shrink. And though he was punished, though he was stripped of name, status, and freedom, he left behind something unbreakable: beauty. I sometimes think beauty is its own kind of rebellion, and perhaps that is what this grave represents. Not just remembrance, but resistance. The tree above shakes loose a few more leaves. One drifts slowly down, spinning in the still air, before landing atop the glass. I imagine it resting on his chest. He would have admired its color, the symmetry of its veins, the way it died without bitterness. I remain still. The silence thickens now, not heavy, but full of unsent letters, unfinished lines, unspoken names. Somewhere nearby, someone reads aloud from The Importance of Being Earnest. I hear laughter, a soft, honest sound. Not the cruel laughter of the courtroom, but the laughter Oscar loved. Clever, surprised, free. And beneath the stone, I believe he hears it. Not as a ghost, not as an echo, but as a man whose words still ripple through time. I step back, letting the tomb recede behind me, its glass glinting once more in the moonlight. The kisses remain, the verses remain, the beauty remains, and so do I. The night deepens, folding Père-Lachaise into a gentler silence. The wind softens, as if the cemetery itself has leaned closer to listen. And I, its quiet keeper, drift toward the edges of memory, where Oscar's voice, once loud and lion-hearted, turned inward, towards shadows and solitude. There is a part of Wilde's story that feels like exile even before he left his country. His whole life, in some way, was a careful performance on the border between acceptance and rejection. His wit was his shield, his elegance a kind of defiance. But when the laughter faded, what remained was a man torn from everything he loved, not by death, but by shame. I remember the night he fled England. The lamps of the Gare du Nord blinked beneath a gray sky. His footsteps, hurried but heavy, crossed the threshold into France like a man stepping out of his name. His once golden reputation lay shattered in London's courtrooms, and with it the life he had built, his home, his writing, his children, all gone. He came to Paris with nothing but sorrow in his coat pocket, and the sound of disgrace trailing behind him like a tattered cape. The world knew his name now, but it spoke it with mockery. No publisher dared touch him. No friend risked being seen beside him. He wandered the cafés of Montmartre and Montparnasse like a ghost wearing silk. And yet, he wrote. Not on the glossy pages of society magazines or the bright stages of the West End, but in hotel corners and faded notebooks. He wrote as though his words were the only parts of him left unbroken. There was sadness in every sentence, but also clarity. A clarity that had cost him nearly everything. In those final years, Oscar was a man remade by pain. The Wilde of Oxford and London, the man of epigrams and embroidered waistcoats, had been buried long before he arrived at Père-Lachaise. What remained was more fragile, more tender, and strangely more human. He moved from hotel to hotel, never truly welcomed, always too well known to disappear completely. There is one room in particular I remember. A dim, narrow chamber on the left bank, walls stained by damp and age. He lay on a brass-framed bed, watching the wallpaper curl at the edges. "My wallpaper and I are fighting a duel to the death," he said once. "One or the other of us has to go." That was Wilde until the end. Humor drawn from despair, irony delivered with a bow. Even when abandoned, even when penniless, he remained the playwright, composing his last lines in shadows. The air in the cemetery tonight tastes of stone and damp tobacco. Somewhere near the eastern slope, a fox moves through the hedgerow, unseen by most. I hear its soft padding and remember Oscar feeding stray cats in alleyways behind cafes. He said they understood exile. They never asked questions. Sometimes in the darker hours, Wilde sat alone in those cafes, his fingers idle around a glass of absinthe, listening, always listening. He listened to the voices of strangers, to the rhythms of a language he had not grown up with, but loved instinctively. French suited him. It flowed like silk and stung like perfume. In it he could vanish for a moment. But the past, like ivy, always finds a way to climb back. He could not forget his sons, Cyril and Vivian, whom he was forbidden to see. He could not forget Bosie, the love that broke him. He could not forget the cell, the silence, the cold. Nor the eyes that once looked at him with admiration, now turned away. And so he wandered, not just the streets of Paris, but the inner corridors of his own soul. He became something more than the man who once stood triumphant in salons. He became a question. Was it worth it? I ask it now, not to him, but to the sky, to the trees that sway gently over his grave, to the dust that settles between the cracks in the glass. He answered it in his way, with prose, with poetry, with silence. His letters from exile reveal a man stripped bare. No longer ornamented by cleverness, they speak plainly of love and loss, of longing and regret. In one he wrote, "I have nothing left but my genius, and I must let it starve." And yet, Even starving, it fed others. Even disgraced, he gave language to those who had none. Even dying, he taught the world how to live beautifully, even when broken. I remember when the letter arrived in London, unsigned, folded once. It contained only a quote, scribbled in Wilde's unmistakable hand. "The truth is rarely pure and never simple." Perhaps that was his final lesson, that truth, like beauty, defies borders. It offends, it dazzles, it ruins, and it saves. The wind shifts again, bringing the scent of wet leaves and fading roses. I linger near the steps that lead away from his tomb, not quite ready to leave. He spent so much of his life being left behind. And still people return, writers, dreamers, exiles of other kinds. They come to read his name in the stone, to see themselves reflected in the glass, to leave behind a whisper or a kiss. In exile, he became immortal. I look upward. The clouds part for a moment, revealing the thin curve of a waning moon. Its light spills across the grave like ink from a broken pen. And beneath it, Oscar rests, not in silence, but in story. Even now, after so many years, I often return to that place between the trees where Oscar rests. But tonight, I do not speak aloud. I listen. There is a peculiar thing that happens here when the mist settles low and the air hums with memory. If one stands long enough beside Wilde's tomb, still, patient, with one's breath softened by the hush of the earth, something else begins to surface. I have heard them, conversations that never happened but could have, words suspended in the quiet, not quite ghosts, not quite dreams, just traces. It begins with laughter, not loud, not jarring, never disruptive. A laugh warm and distant, as if someone has just said something very clever and very true. A pause, then a voice, not Wilde's, but close. Perhaps Bosey's, speaking gently, almost ashamed. The conversation plays out like dialogue from one of his lost plays, staged now in the shadows of ivy and carved stone. "I shouldn't have let them take you," the imagined Bosey says. "You never knew how to fight," Oscar replies, his voice light, unburdened by blame. "Only how to love beautifully and terribly." These conversations, entirely of memory's invention, come not from what was, but from what might have been. They haunt me, but not in sorrow. They are gentle hauntings, the kind that make the silence sweeter. I imagine Wilde walking the paths of Père-Lachaise as he once did the streets of Paris. Slower now, less flamboyant, but still unmistakable. The cane tapping softly on the gravel, the scarf hanging long and carelessly over one shoulder, a smile tugging at his lips. Perhaps in this imagined world he meets others here. Chopin nodding quietly from beneath a tree, Gertrude Stein raising a brow in acknowledgement, Marcel Proust lingering just long enough to murmur something about longing. Oscar would fit among them, not because he shares their fame, but because he shares their hunger for meaning. In life, he collected admiration like petals, but intimacy eluded him. So many adored him from afar, too afraid to love him up close. The laughter was easy, the understanding rare. And in those imagined conversations that dance between the marble, I sometimes hear what he never said aloud. "I wore my wit like a coat in winter," he murmurs to no one in particular. "It kept me warm, but never let anyone touch my skin." There is something terribly honest in that thought. Père-Lachaise is filled with echoes of unfinished dialogue. Lovers who never said goodbye, children who left their lullabies half-sung, artists who died with the last line still unwritten. But Oscar's story feels different. He left us so much, and yet it feels as though he was always speaking from a place just beyond reach, where we could hear his words but never quite hold them. The air thickens slightly as fog begins to curl low across the ground. It pools around the base of his tomb, softening the sharpness of the stone, giving the sculpture a strange, living presence. The wings seem to shift in the haze, not to move, but to breathe. I remember something Wilde once said, not in a poem, but in passing. "I don't want to be remembered as a man who suffered. I want to be remembered as a man who felt everything and still sang." That, perhaps, is the legacy he left. Not just the books, not just the phrases polished into brilliance, but the refusal to be bitter. He gave the world his ruin, and even that was beautiful. The imagined conversations continue. Sometimes it is Wilde with his mother, Lady Jane. She sits with her back straight, her voice strong, quoting verse in Irish Gaelic. Oscar rests his head in her lap, as if he is 10 years old again, and no trial, no prison, no heartbreak has happened yet. Other times it is with his sons, who never knew him fully as he was. In these imagined moments, they do not judge. They sit beside him and ask about stars, about plays, about why words can hurt and heal. He answers them softly, gently, as if they might stay a while. There is comfort in imagining the life he might have had, one not wrecked by law or scandal, but shaped by gentler hands. But I do not linger too long in fiction. I know the truth, the jagged edges of it. He died poor, alone, his health crumbling, his friends few. His last words, half-joked, were as much defiance as despair. "This wallpaper and I are in mortal combat. One of us has to go." It is strange how often the dying choose humor for their last breath, a final trick against the great stillness. The fog rises now, brushing past my knees. The cemetery begins to vanish into it, headstone by headstone, until only the tomb of the poet remains clear. The lipstick on the glass glistens faintly in the mist, like embers refusing to die. In these conversations imagined, Oscar is never bitter. Perhaps that is my wish. But I believe, in the end, he found a kind of peace, not in the world's forgiveness, which came far too late, but in the knowledge that his words would outlive the silence. He once said, "The books that the world calls immoral are the books that show the world its own shame." He wrote without flinching. He loved without permission. He suffered without surrender. That is why, even now, people return, not to pity him, but to thank him. The conversations fade into the mist. I remain alone again beside the tomb. The air grows colder, the silence fuller, but something lingers, sweet and low, like the last notes of a violin. Perhaps it was never about the trials, the prison, the exile. Perhaps it was always about the music. The fog curls around the tomb like the spine of an old book, each breath of mist lifting the past in delicate pages. I walk slowly now, past names carved in fading stone, past angels with cracked wings and weeping faces. The scent of the air has changed. It is thicker, sweeter, earth mixed with the faint trace of ink, a fragrance that doesn't truly exist except for those who loved both writing and mourning. There's something unmistakable about that smell. The dampness of paper touched by candlelight, the metallic twang of old type, and beneath it, the warm hum of worn leather bindings. If I could bottle it, I would call it memory, or perhaps Oscar. He wrote in ink, but bled through the words. His prose was always more than clever. It was confessional, even when cloaked in comedy. Even in his plays, behind the laughter, there was always a truth coiled tight like a spring waiting to snap. And when he wrote in exile, the perfume of that ink grew darker. De Profundis, that long, aching letter he penned in prison, addressed to Bosie, was never meant to be a performance. It was raw, bruised, and bleeding. He filled it with the pain of betrayal and the ruin of love, but also with strange hope. Hope that someone, someday, would read those pages and understand. I have read it many times, not with eyes, but with the stillness that draws echoes from the past. He wrote not just to Bosie, but to time itself. He asked to be remembered not as a martyr, but as a man who tried. And in those lines, the scent of ink still rises, slow and sure, like a confession whispered in a chapel at dusk. There is something sacred in that, something that lives here, even now. I crouch beside a nearby tombstone, one forgotten by most, its letters worn smooth by a century of rain. Beneath the soil lies someone who likely once saw Oscar from across a street or a stage. Perhaps they shared a glance, a drink, or a secret. Père-Lachaise is full of these possible intersections, lives that brushed against each other once, never knowing they'd rest beneath the same sky. A small blackbird hops near Wilde's grave. It pauses, head tilted, as if listening for something buried deeper than bone. And then it sings, not a full song, but a broken phrase of music, trailing off into silence. I wonder if Wild ever envied the birds, not for their flight, but for the simplicity of their song. No irony, no disguise, just sound, honest and unadorned. That was the journey of his writing, wasn't it? From ornament to essence, from plays filled with masks and wit to letters stripped of artifice. His last words, his last poems, they bore no glitter, only gravity. The ink ran slower then, less flourish, more weight. And the earth, oh, the earth knew it. There is something about soil that understands ink better than any printing press, the same way stone understands names. It absorbs what we leave behind and keeps it safe beneath the surface. I believe Oscar's words, some of them lost, never published, never read aloud, are still here. Not in books, but in the ground itself, infused in the moss, the roots, the rainfall. A young visitor once stood here, years ago, holding a copy of The Picture of Dorian Gray. She didn't say a word. She knelt, opened the book to a bookmarked page, and simply let it sit there for a while against the tombstone. The wind fluttered the pages. No one else noticed, but I did. I watched as she traced one line with her fingertip. Behind every exquisite thing that existed, there was something tragic. She didn't cry, she didn't speak. She simply let that line echo, as if it had been meant for her alone. Perhaps it had. Wilde's tragedy wasn't that he died disgraced. It's that the world took so long to recognize what it had lost. He gave it beauty, wrapped in defiance, and the world responded with punishment. And now, generations later, we gather in the place where he lies and offer silent apologies. The cemetery tonight is soft, its breath low and rhythmic, a quiet inhalation of time. Even the crows have gone still. I walk past rows of marble, feeling the moisture settle against my skin like ink absorbed into vellum. And I wonder, what were the final words he wished he'd written? Did he carry them with him to the end, or did he let them go? Perhaps they rise now in the fog, unspoken but not lost. The perfume of ink and earth is strongest when the night is deepest, and tonight it is very deep. At the foot of Oscar's tomb, someone has left a small tin of violet ink, still sealed. A note beside it reads simply, "For the words you didn't get to say." I do not touch it. I merely stand and watch as a thin trail of mist curls around it. There is so much he didn't get to say. But even in silence, he is not quiet. Even in death, he writes. With petals and shadows, with fog and stone, with ink that never dries. I leave now, my steps soft upon the gravel, carrying with me the scent of earth and memory. And just behind me, the faintest trace of ink lingers in the air. The stillness deepens now. Père-Lachaise folds itself into shadow, and the grave markers, lined like tired sentinels, watch without watching. The silence here is never empty. It is a silence filled with listening, with remembering, with echoes that do not vanish, only rest. I drift toward the narrow path behind Oscar's tomb, where the ivy clings tighter and the lanterns, though unlit, seem to remember light. It is here, in this darker corner, that I often return to a thought I cannot put down. Oscar was not only judged once, he is judged still. The memory of him has long since shed the venom of his trial, but the stain remains, the faint afterimage of moralism, shame, and punishment. He lived in a time that confused love with sin, beauty with arrogance, and genius with danger. And when they no longer found him amusing, they condemned him. Gross indecency. That was the charge. A phrase so simple, so clinical, and yet beneath it, centuries of fear and cruelty. They did not only try Oscar Wilde, they tried what he represented. Openness, freedom, queerness, vulnerability wrapped in silk. The judges wore powdered wigs and stiff expressions. The juries nodded along. The newspapers feasted. And Oscar, with all his glittering wit, stood in the center and refused to pretend. He did not run. He did not beg. He stood. And for that, they buried him long before he died. As I pause here, I can almost feel the cold stone of the courtroom floor beneath my feet, the echo of his boots as he entered, the stillness as he offered his defense, not in legal terms, but in poetry. When asked to justify his love, he quoted from the Symposium. He spoke of affection as noble, of beauty as divine. The courtroom, blind to nuance, called it arrogance. But I call it courage. Because what Oscar did that day was not defend a crime. He defended his soul. The love that dare not speak its name. That was the phrase Wilde used, or rather, the one the prosecutor accused him of celebrating. And Wilde, impossibly, beautifully, answered not with fear, but with fire. It is beautiful, it is fine, it is the noblest form of affection. There is nothing unnatural about it. It is intellectual, and it repeatedly exists between an older man and a younger one, when the older man has intellect, and the younger man has all the joy, hope, and glamour of life before him. There was a moment, just one, where the room fell utterly silent. Not because they agreed, but because they had never heard love described so plainly from a place so condemned. It was not a defense, it was a truth. And for that, they sentenced him. 2 years of hard labor, solitary confinement, hunger, cold, the destruction of health, reputation, livelihood. He emerged from prison with broken teeth and a weakened heart. What punishment for poetry! What sentence for love! I step now onto a section of the path overgrown with moss. The stone beneath my feet is slick, as if time itself has tried to cover it. This part of the cemetery is quieter still, but I feel him here. Not Oscar in wit or Oscar in elegance, but Oscar in pain. I have heard whispers from visitors who say they feel a sadness near the tomb, a heaviness. Some describe it as a kind of grief that is not theirs but is suddenly inside them. Others say it feels like injustice breathing just behind the veil of death. I do not disagree. Because this place is not only a monument to Wilde's brilliance, it is also a record of what the world did to him. The tomb is beautiful, yes, But it is also a reminder. It says, "You did this. You called genius indecent. You called love illegal." And yet, the world has changed. Not enough, but it has. In 2017, over a century after his conviction, the United Kingdom passed the so-called Alan Turing Law, retroactively pardoning men convicted under historical laws banning homosexual acts. Oscar Wilde's name was among those pardoned. A pardon. A word with the taste of apology, but none of its warmth. The world condemned him while he lived, and cleared his name long after his voice had gone quiet. What is a pardon to dust? What is justice to bones? Still, something in me feels Wilde might have smiled, not because he needed it, but because he always understood the absurdity of society, that it stumbles toward truth long after those who carried it are gone. The wind stirs again, colder now. The glass around his tomb glints with faint moonlight. A woman walks by slowly, her coat drawn tight, her eyes fixed on the monument. She does not speak, but she pauses, presses her hand lightly to the glass, and walks on. She knows. They all do. Oscar's punishment did not destroy him. It transformed him. It peeled back the theater and left the writer standing alone in his skin. And somehow, even then, he did not stop offering beauty. The Ballad of Reading Gaol was his final rebellion, not against the guards or the sentence, but against the erasure. He gave voice to prisoners whose names would never appear in books. He wept for them on the page, and in doing so, he made their suffering sacred. He made his own suffering sacred. Yet each man kills the thing he loves, he wrote. By each let this be heard. Wilde knew that judgment rarely ends in courtrooms. It continues long after the verdict. It lives in whispers and headlines, in family shame and erased letters. But Wilde, with all his wounds, made sure his words would outlive the judgment. And here, now, standing in this quiet grove beneath the waning moon, I feel the judgment finally fading. Not gone, never gone, but fading. Because this place no longer holds only his punishment. It holds his redemption. It holds his redemption. The night in Père-Lachaise has grown thick and velveted, wrapped in layers of dew and breathless pause. My footsteps are soundless now. Even the gravel seems to hush beneath me. And as I pass beneath the low arch of intertwined branches, limbs of elm and yew reaching toward one another, I hear it again. Laughter. Not mocking, not cruel, just laughter. Light, uncontained, fading quickly, like a match struck in the dark. It is the kind of laughter Oscar once carried with him like perfume, applied lightly, always lingering, always just enough. I remember it well, that warm, layered sound rising from the back of his throat with theatrical precision and genuine delight. There was something almost musical in it, a laugh that disarmed the pompous and disoriented the cruel. How often he made others laugh, how rarely, in the end, he laughed for himself. In London, in the days of fame, Wilde would fill parlors and dinner tables with a kind of giddy intellectual performance. He turned conversation into a sport, a spectacle, a dance. He once said, "I put all my genius into my life. I put only my talent into my works." And truly, he was an event. Dressed in velvet jackets and carnations, quoting classics with irreverent sparkle, drawing eyes without trying. But behind the glitter was a loneliness few saw. He wore his laughter like a mirror, showing others what they wanted to see, while keeping his own sorrows carefully veiled. Those closest to him spoke of his melancholy, which came in long, slow waves. It arrived after applause, in the quiet moments after the curtain fell. I feel it here now. Not despair, no, but that subtle ache of joy that has vanished. The residue of a laugh too long unreturned. Somewhere near his grave, beneath a crooked tree, a bench leans to one side. It is often overlooked. Its wood is worn, its paint flaked away. But I have seen many pause there. Young poets with ink-stained hands, lovers holding silence between them, the lonely who have nothing to say but everything to feel. One such visitor came not long ago, a man perhaps in his 30s. He sat with a small notebook balanced on one knee. He did not write, he only listened, and then, very softly, he began to laugh. Not because something was funny, but because something in the air reminded him how long it had been since he'd felt permission to laugh at all. That is the strange gift Wilde left behind, a kind of rebellious joy, the joy of being oneself in a world that demands masks, the joy of speaking plainly in a place that punishes honesty, the joy of living beautifully and foolishly and entirely. And yet he paid dearly for it. After the trial, the laughter ceased. Those who once invited him into salons and theaters now turned their faces. His name was erased from playbills. His books were removed from shelves. His jokes, once echoed with delight, became cautionary whispers. But still he wrote, and still he remembered how to smile, even if only inwardly. In a letter near the end of his life, he wrote, "I am not a man who lives with bitterness. I live with memory, and I laugh when I can." I believe him. Even as illness weakened him, even as poverty shadowed his days, Wilde kept the echo of laughter in his chest. He never let the world take all of him. Some corner of his soul remained untamed. I pause now near the tomb, looking up at the stone wings that rise from its base. They seem frozen in a moment of flight, caught mid-beat, straining towards a sky just out of reach. The sculptor captured something eternal in their shape, a longing that never dies. The laughter I heard earlier fades completely now, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves overhead. A breeze, warmer than before, moves through the ivy like a sigh. I close my eyes and imagine Oscar here, just for a moment. What would he say? Probably something sly, something tender. Did they finally forgive me? He might ask, arching one perfect eyebrow. Or did they just forget how to stay angry? I would answer, they remember, Oscar. They remember now with love. And he would laugh again, not the laugh of victory, but the laugh of a man who sees the absurdity in it all and chooses joy anyway. There is something holy in laughter reclaimed. The grave is surrounded now by tokens, a single white carnation, a pair of antique spectacles, a folded poem written on tissue paper, weighted by a stone. Offerings, yes, but also answers, as if the world is finally learning how to speak back to Wilde in his own language. He wrote once, "Man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask, and he will tell you the truth." But here, now, the masks fall away. His truth is ours. We no longer need disguises to honor him. The light above dims further. The moon, veiled by a passing cloud, casts the tomb into soft shadow. I sit quietly at its base, feeling the presence of all those who've come before, who've laughed with Wilde's words and cried with his wounds. His plays still grace the stage. His quotes still line journals and lectures. His story still stirs the hearts of those who have felt the sting of exclusion and the balm of being understood. And in every laugh that rises, hesitant, broken, free, there is a trace of him. In the cracks of this marble, in the moss between stones, in the sigh of ivy against the wind. Oscar Wilde, the man who once filled drawing rooms with delight, whose wit danced like candlelight, and whose tragedy silenced a city, lives on not in mourning, but in laughter remembered. The kind that comes just before tears, the kind that forgives everything. The night drapes itself more heavily now, as if even the stars have dimmed to match the hush that hangs above the tombs. In this quiet, the world begins to dissolve into dream. Edges soften, shadows stretch, and every grave seems to breathe with memory. I stand now before the sculpture that crowns Oscar Wilde's resting place. The great winged figure carved by Jacob Epstein. Stone lips sealed, limbs stretched forward as if mid-flight. The body neither male nor female, but something in between, something eternal. It is no angel in the traditional sense, and yet it watches like one. Its wings have always stirred something in me. They do not fold protectively. They reach outward, as though the stone itself desires escape, like Oscar. Those wings have seen the world change. They were once defaced, censored, covered in tar and glass. For decades, the monument sparked as much controversy as the man it honored. And yet it remains, enduring not just as sculpture, but as defiance, as tribute, as testimony. Many pass it quickly, awed perhaps, confused. But if you sit long enough in the silence beneath those wings, something shifts. Tonight, I do just that. I sit beneath the stone figure, letting my breath grow long, slow, indistinct. The ground beneath me is cold, but not unfriendly. The trees above rustle with a language older than speech. and I remember. Oscar always spoke of transformation, of masks and truth and becoming. He believed that beauty could lift us out of pain, that art could elevate even the deepest sorrow. And this sculpture, these wings, seem to understand that. Not just as a symbol of flight, but of shedding, of leaving behind what does not serve. The prison, the shame, the mockery, even the applause. Epstein's sculpture was controversial for its exposed figure, its unapologetic boldness. Officials tried to hide its anatomical features. They called it indecent. But what they feared, as they had feared in Oscar, was not nudity, it was vulnerability. It was truth without disguise. They covered the monument just as they tried to cover Oscar's life, with ridicule, shame, and silence. But Wilde, even in death, refused to be silenced. And neither did this stone. Years later, the figure still stands, unashamed, its wings outstretched toward the sky, as if to say, "Judge if you must, but I will not bow." I look up at the sculpture now, the moonlight tracing soft silver over the wings. There is a strange comfort in its shape, a stillness within its motion. I imagine Oscar here, not as the man on trial, not as the figure in exile, but as something freer, the essence of him, the dream of him. He watches from some space between the veil, not to haunt, but to remind that truth is worth the cost, that laughter heals, that beauty matters, that love, though punished, endures. A breeze moves gently across the cemetery, lifting a few leaves in its wake. One flutters past the sculpture and lands beside a candle, half burnt, left in a small glass near the base. The wax is soft, still warm. Someone was here recently. Perhaps they stood just where I now sit. Perhaps they whispered something to the figure above, a line of poetry, a question, a thank you. There is no need for answers in this place, only echoes. I run my hand lightly along the stone base, tracing no words, just the texture. The cold is fading now, replaced by something almost warm, as if the stone itself breathes. And in that breath, I hear Oscar again, not the wit, not the bravado, but the softness he rarely showed, the tenderness buried beneath performances. A voice slower now, less adorned, wiser perhaps. He says nothing, but I feel him here. Not in the glass, not in the lipstick marks, but in the space between the wings. The cemetery exhales, and I with it. I look to the sky. Only a few stars remain visible, pale behind the drifting clouds. They flicker like memories, bright, brief, precious. Oscar's words were like that too. They arrived in flashes, in gasps, in sudden illuminations. To live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist. That is all. He lived. Even when they tried to unwrite him, to shame him, to bury him in more than earth, he lived. And now the stone lives with him. Wilde's grave does not weep. It rises. Like the sculpture, like the spirit it protects. The wings are still now, but they hold the shape of motion, of something that will not remain buried. And I, silent guardian of these echoes, remain still beneath them, not mourning, but remembering. The final hour of night begins to descend gently over Père-Lachaise, like a curtain drawn in reverence. The fog is thinning, and the stars return, blinking softly in the sky, as if stirred from slumber. The paths are nearly invisible now, swallowed by the hush. And still the tomb stands. Still the air listens. Still Oscar whispers. Not in speech, but in wind, in stone, in the gentle rustle of ivy. His words, born of paper and breath, do not remain only in books. They have found other ways to live. In song, in laughter, in defiance, in the way someone pauses mid-sentence to choose a kinder word, in the way two hands touch without apology, in the way poetry lingers in a room long after the page is turned. I feel them now, his words, drifting through the cemetery like leaves, like birds, not bound to grammar or structure, just fragments, feelings, echoes. The very essence of romance is uncertainty. Be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. A truth ceases to be true when more than one person believes it. They swirl gently through the air, brushing past statues and crypts, catching in the corners of tombstones, gathering like snow. Visitors come and go, but the words remain, spoken under breath, read from battered books, memorized by heart, shared in shadows. One autumn, I recall, a young man stood just beyond the glass of Wilde's tomb and began to recite aloud from The Ballad of Reading Gaol. His voice was soft, uncertain at first, but it grew steadier, more certain, until it filled the air around him like a hymn. Yet each man kills the thing he loves. By each let this be heard. By the end, he was crying, not sobbing, just still and wet-eyed, the way one cries not from sadness, but from recognition. The cemetery did not interrupt. The night listened. That is the gift Oscar left behind. Not just art, but the courage to feel deeply, to speak truths that tremble, to write from the ache rather than the applause. He once said, "A poet can survive everything but a misprint." But I believe he survived far more. He survived disgrace. He survived time. He survived silence. Even now, I can almost see him, beneath those wings, beneath the stone, beneath the ground, but not entombed, transformed. He walks not in ghostliness, but in resonance, a presence that does not fade, only softens, like the edge of a poem long memorized. There's something different about this section of the cemetery, always has been. The air here feels charged, like music just beyond hearing. You can almost feel the lines of poetry moving through it, not in order, not in rhyme, but in rhythm. The kind of rhythm that lives in breath, in pulse, in the spaces between thoughts. Oscar was rhythm, not in meter, but in movement. He moved through life like a tide, sometimes crashing, sometimes withdrawing, always changing the shore. And the shore remembered him, still does. On a nearby tree, initials are carved, clumsy hearts encircling names, one of them O.W. The tree has grown, healed around the cuts, but the marks remain, scars of admiration, scars of love. Some scars are worth keeping. Tonight, there is no audience, no stage, no courtroom, only sky and stone. And in this stillness, Wilde's voice feels most whole, not quoted, not debated, just present. I sit beside his grave now, not as a guardian, but as a listener. I imagine the wind as a page turning. I imagine the stars as poetry, pauses in a sentence too large to read all at once. A woman passes quietly, pausing to leave a folded poem near the base of the glass. She whispers, "For the ones who never fit the frame," and walks on. Oscar hears her, not with ears, with echo. I close my eyes and let his words settle around me, not as text, but as warmth. They do not demand interpretation. They ask only to be felt, like a verse that reaches you before you know why, like a line that lands softly but stays forever. To love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance. He meant it. He had to, because so few ever truly loved him without condition. But he loved, even when it broke him, and he wrote, even when it condemned him. And because he did, someone tonight will write a poem instead of holding their pain in silence. Someone will laugh when they would have hidden their joy. Someone will kiss someone they love and refuse to explain why. Because Wilde lived and dared and spoke. And the wind carries his words still, through the trees, through the lips of strangers, through pages left folded on his tomb, and into the hearts of the quiet, the brave, the broken. Oscar never needed immortality. He simply needed to be remembered. And here, among the poets and the stones, he is. The air has thinned now, like a breath exhaled for the final time. Père-Lachaise no longer hums, it sighs. Everything softens. The stones seem less sharp. The trees lean in more closely. The sky lowers its gaze. Here, at the edge of night, where silence becomes sleep, Wilde's resting place seems to glow, not with light, but with presence. The tomb no longer demands attention. It simply waits. It has said what it needed to say, not through voice, but through the devotion of those who come, who whisper, who remember. And now, all that remains is stillness. I walk a final circle around the grave, slowly, tracing the curved shadows that the wings cast onto the earth. They do not rise tonight. They do not need to. They have risen often enough in the hearts of those who've stood beneath them. Beneath the glass barrier, at the base of the sculpture, a single white feather has fallen, perhaps from a bird passing high overhead, or perhaps something else. It lies weightless, delicate, its edges glowing faintly in the moonlight. A gift, a sign, a farewell. Wilde's name is carved simply, boldly, Oscar Wilde. No titles, no flourishes. But to those who know, who truly know, his name contains universes. He is no longer the prisoner, nor the scandal, not the exile, nor the shadow of a ruined man. He is no longer burdened by courts or editors, or the jeers of a society that forgot to love what it could not understand. He is poetry now, not the kind that rhymes, the kind that breathes, the kind that finds you when you need it most, the kind that feels like a whisper where none should exist. And I, who have watched over this resting place for longer than memory measures, feel my vigil soften. The night is no longer something to hold back, but something to slip into, slowly, tenderly. Somewhere beyond the cemetery walls, the world still spins, loud, fast, demanding. But here, within these gates, only calm remains, only echo, only the hush of leaves returning to soil. I lower myself onto a stone bench nearby, my back to the tomb now. I do not need to see it to know it is there. Wilde's presence does not live only in stone. It lives in what was left behind. A single line of verse, a sudden laugh, a defiant glance, a kiss pressed in secret, a truth spoken out loud for the very first time. These are the footprints he left, and they do not fade. The glass barrier around the tomb reflects a faint, distorted image of the world beyond it. Trees blurred into clouds, footsteps turned to shadow. But behind the glass, in stillness, Wilde sleeps. Not in silence, but in peace. The air is colder now, but I no longer feel it. Everything around me moves slower. The cemetery prepares for the first light, but it is still far from dawn. I listen once more, not for a voice, but for a presence. And there it is, light, like paper lifted by wind, a feeling that someone, somewhere, has just opened a book to the first page, or laughed for the first time in days, or kissed without apology, or lived. Oscar Wilde is not buried, he is remembered, and in that remembering he rises. The night now folds in upon itself, wrapping Père-Lachaise in its softest shadows. The wind no longer moves. Even the ivy seems to sleep. The tombs, once brimming with stories, now exhale the last of their whispers into the slow rhythm of silence. The wings above Oscar's resting place no longer stretch. They hover gently, as if remembering what it felt like to fly. Around them, time slows, sounds blur, thought drifts. A hush settles over the marble, a hush that carries no sorrow, only stillness. Close your eyes now, traveler. Let the gravel path beneath your feet fade. Let the shape of the tomb dissolve. Let the names carved in stone melt into the mist. All that remains is a breath, slow, deep, unbroken. The scent of damp earth lingers softly, like a forgotten page in a book closed long ago. Somewhere, faintly, a laugh echoes, not loud, not bright, but remembered. It fades, and in its place, sleep. You are no longer standing by the grave. You are floating above it, untethered, gentle, swaying among the branches. Leaves fall slowly beside you, each one a word, a line, a dream once spoken. Let them fall. Let them carry you. Let them settle on the quiet soil of your thoughts. You are safe now. You are soft now. You are distant from the weight of days. And as night deepens, Oscar Wilde, poet, exile, flame, rests beneath your dreams. His story is done. Yours continues, gently. Good night, traveler through time. May your dreams carry the scent of old pages, the hush of moss-covered stones, and the echo of wings poised forever in stillness. And may morning find you rested, cradled in the soft earth of memory.